Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CMG's webinar today, hosted by GT Software. If you are not familiar with our organization, the Computer Measurement Group is a not-for-profit worldwide organization of IT professionals committed to sharing information and best practices focused on ensuring the efficiency and scalability of IT delivery. We offer in-person and online events such as this one with our ongoing membership. Thank you for joining us today for what to consider when evaluating mainframe migration, ensure functionality, security, and scalability, hosted by GT Software. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you all are aware that you can submit questions using the Questions tab located in the GoToWebinar side panel, and we will be collecting these questions throughout today's session. Q&A will be prompted, and if by the end we did not get to your question, no need to worry. We will follow up with a blog written by our own presenters today. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to your two presenters today. Raul Menendez is an application development manager at CBS Corporation. He is an accomplished leader in app development with a consistent track record of success. He has managed technology roadmaps, development teams, support organizations, and authored 4 best-selling mainframe books. He's a hands-on executive with a wide variety of technical experience in both distributed and mainframe environments. He currently manages a team of developers who migrated Simon & Schuster's publishing to NeoBatch and NeoKix. In addition, he also led the migration of CBS Television Distribution Center to NeoSuite. Walter Sweat is the principal technical architect at GT Software. He has over 40 years experience working on mainframe applications as well as mainframe migration and modernization projects. Prior to working at GT Software, Walter worked for numerous Fortune 500 companies such as Home Depot and Dell. Without further ado, welcome guys, and I'm going to go ahead and give you over, Walter, so that you can go ahead and start.
Fantastic, Mary. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thanks. And Mary, just to ask, make sure I'm not going to assume here, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I learned a long time ago not to assume that everything just happens automatically, so I like to ask that question.
Absolutely.
Okay. So thank you all for taking the time to join us today as we talk about a subject that's near and dear to me, and that's mainframe migration. And I'm delighted to be talking to you about this subject with someone who has extremely strong real-world experience in both working on the mainframe and in actually mastering that migration process. Raul and I have known each other for over 10 years, and there really is no one I respect more in being able to use technology to solve business problems and to know the ins and outs of what to expect in a mainframe migration. First, for those of you who may not have heard of GT Software, we're a 35-plus-year-old company that is really focused on the mainframe from the very beginning. We obviously recognize and appreciate all that the mainframe offers organizations, and we've spent 3+ decades building tools that help companies modernize their applications on the mainframe. So, in terms of some of the companies you may have heard of, and of course some you may not have heard of, Mary mentioned Simon & Schuster, where Raul has authored and managed the migration process as well as with CBS. Most everyone has heard of GNC, General Nutrition Centers in Pittsburgh. Telecom Italia, the Italian phone company for handling all of the phone in Italy. So we have customers large and small who have used the solution stack that we are going to talk about today. So the first question that people might ask is, why in the world would I ever want to migrate from the mainframe? As I said, we here at GT Software have 35 years going on a history of supporting mainframe organizations and modernizing their environments. So we understand what a solid and powerful platform it is. But we also understand that the mainframe, with all of the associated third-party products that go along with it, well, it can put heavy financial pressure on organizations. And that's the primary reason that we've been able to help so many organizations completely or partially migrate applications and data from their mainframe to a lower cost environment. Raul, could I ask you to talk for a second about how hard of a decision it was for your organizations to consider getting off of the mainframe?
Yeah, sure. The decision to get off the mainframe was pretty easy. We were really realizing it was just too expensive to maintain, both in terms of licensing costs and the number of resources that it took to use it. So once that decision was made, then it was more of a question of, what direction did we want to go in? Did we want to try to preserve what we had or completely rewrite what we had? We looked at a few options, including including services that would actually translate our old COBOL code into something, into both Java, C#. And what we pretty quickly realized was that those solutions would have been hard to maintain. So, ultimately for us, we chose to really take what we had and really kind of re-platform it onto a new environment, because what it did, it mitigated the risk as much as possible for us, and allowed us to kind of really leverage all of that, all of those years of expertise and experience that we already had with the existing system.
That makes perfect sense. And that's something we've certainly seen as we've talked to customers over the years, that there are certainly very viable options out there, and everybody's going to have something that works best for them. But it is important to consider all of those alternatives as you look at the different ways that you can approach getting off the mainframe. And that being said, we have a couple of polling questions, and this would help us tremendously if we could get a feel from the audience today. What are the kinds of things that you look at when you consider migrating off the mainframe? Mary, could we put that first polling question up, please? Just one second. Okay. So we just wanted to be able to let, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary.
It's up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we just wanted to kind of get a feel for what are the things that you think about when you consider your mainframe environment and where you might like it to go and what makes sense for you to consider. So take just a few seconds here, and then we'll close this poll and move on. Mary, do you think that's enough time? Do you think we've got it covered?
I give it just a second. Got about 66% of the votes in.
Okay, super.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, I mentioned that for many people, and as Raul said, cost obviously comes into play. One of the things that we found out that it helps an organization is to figure out, does it make economic sense to consider moving off the mainframe? Whether you're looking to completely turn it off or just decrease the footprint that's there. So as an example, when companies come to us looking for alternatives, we help them, as I said, try to understand what those financial implications might be. And for us, that's coming up with an ROI. So here's an example of about a 400 MIPS mainframe customer who actually came to us looking to see if it made economical sense to migrate. We can see what they were paying in total mainframe costs annually, and we can see what they will be paying in annual costs after a migration. There's also the cost of the migration and any associated software. And we looked at the cost of the migration, and it was, somewhere between $660,000 and $1.4 million. And all of this was done without even looking at their code, just looking at some base inventory numbers I like to call it trying to figure out if it's a bread box or a battleship that they're looking at. Using that information, we were able to help them get a comfort level that they could get a return on their investment of between 5 and 10 months. And most of our customers have told us that that sort of return on investment makes looking at migration as a very viable alternative, because the difference in mainframe cost and what people can pay in ongoing cost can be quite dramatic. We've seen customers save up to 90% of their annual mainframe costs after a migration. So in terms of some actual examples, a lot of folks haven't heard of Serva, but people know who some of the largest van line organizations are in the United States. And Serva is the parent/holding company of several of the largest of those companies. They were an IBM mainframe, over 1,000 MIPS, and they were interesting because they had a little bit of everything. Lots of assembler and natural. They had not only DB2, but Adabase and Supra. After their migration, they were able to save over $1 million a year net from their previous year's cost. Another very interesting example, I think, is the Scandinavian Data Center, or what we call as SDC, an IBM mainframe of about 11,000 MIPS. Huge amount of COBOL code out there, 20 million transactions per day. They're actually the service organization that handles the ATM transaction processing for over 5.8 million accounts at 146 Scandinavian banks. For them, with a partnership of the GT software, Fujitsu, and Microsoft, they were able to take that 11,000 MIPS off of the mainframe, and they saved, in essence, over $16 million a year. I mentioned before, Telecom Italia, not huge, about 600 MIPS, but they were right in our sweet spot. A lot of CICS and batch and DB2, some vSAN, lots of batch processing, and they were able to save over $1 million a year. And then finally, Desjardins General Insurance in Canada. They were, again, one that had some different technologies in play, both IDMS and ads online. But in this 400 MIPS environment, with all of those different software costs, moving them off of the mainframe, they were able to save over $1.5 million a year. So hopefully you get a feel that, you know, these are substantial real savings that real organizations have seen. Everyone's going to be different, and that's why we like to have an understanding of, you know, what your environment is and what your goals are, and we like to have the opportunity to help people see if it makes economic sense. Sorry. So, Raul, before we move forward, could I ask you to talk about some of the benefits that your organization saw, as well as some of the challenges that you had to overcome?
Yeah, sure. So from a benefit side, development became a lot easier. We had more options. So not only could we choose to maintain the systems we had using COBOL, but because of the interoperability of the .NET environment, we could also extend those applications in any other .NET language that we wanted to. And so what that did was it gave us the option of either using some of our kind of older or established developers or bringing in new talent, depending on what, you know, on what each of those circumstances were. Deployments were easier because now we're in a distributed environment. So that tended to be a lot more straightforward. And also, you know, the platform's more cost effective, so it's also easier to scale and maintain in that aspect. Let's see, another benefit is that it allowed us to retain the developers that we had that had that system knowledge and were very knowledgeable about our applications. And they really only needed minimal retraining to be able to get up and running in that new environment. As far as some of the challenges we've had, oh, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to go into what some of the challenges were. I would say that for us, because of the complexity of some of our job scheduling or requirements, job scheduling took a little bit longer, and there was a little bit more trial and error on our side. But eventually, though, we did hit the sweet spot on that. And from that perspective, right now, we've got a good data center ops team that actually monitors our jobs for us, lets us know if there are any issues, any app ends, so forth. I would say also, initially, the security layer was something that we had to kind of refactor. And so the way that we ended up doing that is that we ended up leveraging Microsoft's Active Directory environment. We ended up creating various AD groups with various levels of access into these applications. And then we managed that by writing our own custom layer class, which both the whole NeoSuite system actually allows or provides hooks for. Other than that, I would say, moving forward, anything new that you create, you always want to just kind of be a little bit mindful of, what technology or what approach you want to use, because, again, that goal is always going to be interoperability. And so you want to make sure from design, you're making good design choices, basically.
That makes perfect sense to me. That's something that I've always felt that, and hope that we are able to help companies with. And I wanted to get your input on the mainframe versus an off-mainframe platform. Do you find that you have more availability of options of technologies that you can use off of the mainframe more so than on the mainframe? Has that been your experience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, like, for example, you're not really... you're not bound necessarily to some of those older mainframe constructs anymore, right? So, for example, if I have our current NeoKix port, so our old CICS application, it really used to be that any kind of data access or any kind of screen manipulation you had to do with CICS commands, and you were bound to that. Well, in the new environment, you can still do that, but in addition to that, you've got the whole .NET class or set of classes available to you, and so there are much easier solutions that you could implement, and that includes anything that you write in-house, anything you pick up off the shelf, and integrate into your existing system, so that flexibility is great.
That's cool. Great, fantastic. Thank you, Raul. So we've mentioned the NeoSuite a couple of times. We've mentioned a couple of products, NeoKix and NeoBatch. I'd like to kind of go and talk about those now. Once companies see that it might make sense for them to consider migration, they obviously need tooling to help them get there. And that's really where we offer our NeoSuite of products. That suite is built to help transition the most used elements of a mainframe environment to what we have found to be a much lower cost environment where, and this is so very important, at least up to date, every one of our customers so far has actually seen better performance after migration, all things being equal. So let's talk about what the NeoSuite comprises. The first element is NeoKix, which allows you to run your mainframe CICS application on a Windows Server environment. Our goal is to leverage the millions and millions of dollars that Microsoft has invested in tools like IIS and MSMQ and Active Directory that Raul mentioned, to move those mainframe CICS apps to an environment where they can get the same level of performance and security at a much lower cost. As an example, here's a typical green screen application that's normal for many companies. Looking at the arrow, we can see that this is a mainframe app that's being run through a terminal emulator to a mainframe. Notice the look and feel here, the standard BMS-driven application. And here's that same application running in a Windows Server environment. Same look and feel, and we can see that we're actually running this application as a Windows ASP.NET environment. But the beauty of this methodology is that once the application is migrated, you can much more easily start to modernize the look and feel of that application by taking advantage of all of the features just inherently available in an ASP.NET app. Adding in items like list boxes and radio buttons, adding in a calendar, and all the other tool sets that are available within a Visual Studio app. It's like doing so with any other ASP.NET application. But the important thing is you're still retaining the proven CICS logic in those programs. And we go out of our way to make sure that on day one, the user experience is exactly the same. As you can see, the screens look exactly the same colors and layout and use of function keys. We do that so that there is not a massive retraining of your users immediately after migration. That is the goal, to be able to let users feel comfortable. And then as you start to move forward, you can pick and choose how you want to modernize those screens. And if you're not using screens, if you're using web services, for instance, to get to applications, that transitions very cleanly over as well. So in terms of CICS, to me, NeoKix offers some really powerful advantages. Based on the commodity type hardware on which these migrated apps can run, the lowered costs can be hugely substantial. IIS offers the ability to yield increased performance, and it also offers more flexibility in how a CICS application is deployed to offer more flexibility, as I said. And then rather than having one or two monolithic mainframes running all of your CICS apps, NeoKix allows you to horizontally scale your architecture. So the benefit of that is that you can more easily respond to changing business needs without substantial increased costs. And as I mentioned before, NeoKix offers you the full capabilities of the native ASP.NET environment as you start to modernize that look and feel of your CICS application. And then finally, NeoKix affords you the ability to more easily control your disaster recovery environment at substantially lower costs. And obviously that is extremely important to ensure that these applications have the same level of uptime and reliability as when you ran them on the mainframe. So, Raul, I know you have years of experience in working with NeoKix. Are there things that you found that you could more easily do with NeoKix than you could when you were running just CICS on the mainframe?
Yeah, it's much easier to extend or change the applications now. So again, as I mentioned a little earlier, you can incorporate standard .NET classes into your code to leverage that large library. You know, I would say, you know, that in addition to that, some of the things that we've done at Simon & Schuster over the years as well are we've incorporated additional websites into kind of our core main order processing system, which is run on NeoKix. And so that integration there really has become seamless. You can pop in and out of some of those older screens into newer modern screens. We've taken other websites and incorporated some of those older existing screens into them. So that flexibility there is great. And what it allows you to also do is allows you to leverage some web developers who don't necessarily need to know or understand that underlying COBOL business logic to be able to integrate these together.
Extremely important point, I think, the fact that you can have different technology capable people working in similar environments and using similar technologies, I have found when I've talked to customers to be huge. So you're saying the same thing then?
Yeah, absolutely. Today we've got a mix of developers that all contribute to the system. Some of them are old mainframe programmers. Other ones, you know enough COBOL to be able to basically, you know, follow along or trace through code, but not much more than that. Those tend to kind of concentrate on extending our application. So that flexibility is great, and it's really important.
Okay, super. Thank you very much, Raul. Just real quick, I'm just going to take a second here. I just wanted to kind of show you what we're talking about. You know, I talked about that mainframe application. If I look at just a basic menu, this is from a BMS screen, and I want to show you how easy it is to work and make these modifications, some of them that we've talked about here. I'm going to look at a different environment, and this is after migration, where we changed to using a drop-down list box here so that we can give a different look and feel. We can do the same thing with radio buttons and other basic controls that are there. And when I actually go look at what that means, all we're really doing is saying in this application, in the HTML code, we're not going to change any COBOL code to do this. I'm just going to change, oops, sorry, pointed to the wrong place. I'm going to change what this menu looked like in HTML, and all of this was generated by a wizard for us. I didn't have to do any code. I just pointed to the BMS maps, and it generated this information for us. But if I didn't want that menu system, and instead, as I said, I wanted to use the drop-down list box, I can change it here and get that benefit. And in this application, if I look at it, in the COBOL code that's there, I still have all of the existing program logic that has always been there. I'm not absorbing the risk of changing things by rewriting it in a different language or having a code generator do something for me. The same business rules that have always worked will continue to work. So that's kind of the goal of what we're looking to do there with our NeoKix product. Let me just close those down. All right, so at this point, I'd like to ask the second polling question. Mary, if I could get you to put that one up there for us as well. And we're interested in knowing the kinds of transaction processors that you use today. And Mary, this time I'll just let you tell me when you think it makes sense to move ahead, please.
Will do. Okay, we're all set to go ahead and move forward.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. The next product in the Neo suite is Neo Batch, which allows you to continue running your mainframe JCL on a lower cost Windows platform. Again, we take advantage of everything that Microsoft offers and being able to more dynamically control your batch environment. And we think that we offer superior performance as well, so that the concern of a shrinking batch window can be eliminated. As I mentioned, our customers to date have all said that they've received better performance in total than they did on the mainframe. As I said, we allow your programmers and computer operators and job schedulers to work with the same JCL that has run on your mainframe for years. We don't really believe in asking your technical resources to have to learn a new paradigm to just keep doing their job. So, working with a COBOL program, passing it parameters, doing conditional processing, running a utility like sort, all of those features that you expect to have in mainframe JCL, your staff gets to continue to work with. But as an example of leveraging the power that Microsoft provides, what happens is we dynamically convert that JCL to either JScript or PowerShell. And that's actually what runs when a JCL job is submitted. You can't really run mainframe JCL in a Windows or a Linux environment. So we let our tool dynamically go through and comment out the original JCL and replace it with the applicable scripting language. And the power of that conversion is that as your mainframe force starts to retire, and it's harder and harder to find someone who understands the way that JCL works, you can start to hire people who understand technologies like PowerShell. And that really is a powerful advantage in not having to be so concerned about your senior staff starting to retire and you not being able to support your ongoing batch environment. Another example of how we leverage what Microsoft offers, we provide the ability to not just print reports, but to do things like convert batch reports to PDF documents and then email them or fax them to a distribution list. And you can do this on a very variety of selection criteria as to what kind of reports go where. And we've had most customers actually able to quit doing printed reports and find a much easier way to maintain that information moving forward. So real quick, what I'm going to do is just show you what NeoBatch looks like. And this is our NeoBatch user interface. And this is a case where I've got for those of you who are used to the mainframe, a PDS library with JCL members. So here's some JCL, and I can just submit that JCL. I'll go ahead and submit these others as well while I'm at it. So you can see we can have multiple jobs running at the same time, and we support the concept of initiators so you can throttle the activity based upon your needs. And as these jobs run, they're producing things that people are used to seeing on the mainframe. If we look at the sysouts for these things, for instance, we'll see the syslog of steps that ran. For each step, what the return code was, how much data was processed, how long it took. We're going to see reports that were generated. So we get the basic reports. And with this, as I said, I could print it, I can fax it, I can email it, just depending upon what my need is. And as I talked about, we, in this case, converted this to JScript. When I press submit, automatically the NeoBatch tool commented out the original JCL and replaced it with the applicable scripting language. And based upon the scripting language, you can actually debug inside of Visual Studio your application. And the debugging within Visual Studio is a really important part of the way that both NeoKix and NeoBatch works. My experience after 40 plus years, it's by far my favorite development environment. And when I go do training, and I'm training people who are 70, sometimes 80 years old, believe it or not, they adapt very quickly to that new environment. So what are the benefits? We feel that obviously NeoBatch offers some very substantial benefits for our customers. As with NeoKix, since you're now running on commodity type hardware with lower associated support software, you should expect substantially lower costs. And especially for companies that do heavy sorting, our sort engine has yielded significant levels of performance, helping to take that pressure off of your batch stream window. And again, as with NeoKix, NeoBatch offers full capabilities for horizontal scalability, helping to better control the batch workload through either hardware or software load balancers. Even deploying in the cloud for these elements, you know, it becomes an environment where you have more flexibility in how you handle your processing. Being able to convert your JCL to something like PowerShell helps alleviate concerns you might have of losing your mainframe JCL knowledge. And then finally, NeoBatch is designed in such a way that it interfaces to all known open system job schedulers. And that usually offers a very significant financial benefit, as the open system versions are most often much less expensive than the mainframe versions. Raul, as with earlier, and since you were an early adopter of NeoBatch, could I ask you what has been your experience in terms of performance and in how it allows you to do things differently in batch as opposed to how they were done when you were running on the mainframe?
Yeah, I would say that with terms of performance, what we could do now is we've got greater flexibility in manipulating our batch jobs. So, in addition to that horizontal scalability that you talked about, even within individual single instances of Neo batch, we can manipulate initiators within that. So we could assign different job classes, different job processes, where we could either limit the number of CPUs that they're using, the amount of memory, their prioritization, and so forth. And so what that helps us do really are, even with some of our systems that are using only a single instance of NeoBatch, it still allows us to squeeze as much performance as we possibly can out of those Windows servers. And again, if we do need to scale out, it's relatively cheap to be able to do so as well. Again, going back to that whole notion of interoperability and the flexibility of this new environment, we also find that with NeoBatch, you can process or use any executable you want within NeoBatch. So if it's an exe, you can incorporate it into your existing JCL and run it from within that batch job as well. So again, over the years, we found that flexibility very advantageous.
I've heard that a lot from people, that sometimes it's just easier for them to write a program in C# or even in Java, because that's what makes the most sense for a particular program. And the fact that NeoBatch doesn't really care, it doesn't have to be COBOL, that has been an advantage. So I'm glad to hear that it's been the same for you.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. All right, so our last polling question, one of the things that we're always interested in is about people's environment and, what development languages they use. So, Mary, let's, if you don't mind, let me know when we have enough responses, and we will move on past this last polling question. Give it just another second or so.
Okay, I'm going to close.
I'm sorry, say again, please.
It's closed.
Okay, we're closed. Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. All right. The third element of the Neo suite is Neo Data, which allows you to move your mainframe vSAM data directly to SQL Server. And this is the important part, without having to change a single line of your COBOL code. One of the challenges with vSAM, I've always felt, is that you often need a programmer to write a one-off program in order to make meaningful use of the data inside of that vSAM information. And while there are tools on the mainframe market that allow end users to directly work with vSAM data, those tools can be very expensive and aren't necessarily easily learned. So many organizations have situations where when an end user needs a report based on vSAM data, they have to enlist the help of a programmer to write a one-off program for them. And too often, the first attempt to get that data in the right format just isn't 100% complete, so it becomes an expensive back and forth process before the user has what they need. NeoData's goal is to eliminate that problem by moving the data directly to SQL Server. Then the end user community can have access to the data at whatever level of access you wish for them to have. And the beauty of that is that your COBOL programs, as I said, still work without any change at all. This isn't a situation where the SQL data is a copy of that VSAM data. Instead, this is a situation where your COBOL programs read and write real-time data to SQL Server just as they used to write to VSAM. So let's just take a real quick look at what NeoData looks like. And what I have here is our NeoData mapping interface. For every VSAM file definition, I'm going to go through a 3-step process that takes about, in the simplest case, about a minute to set up. So for every file that's very simple and easy to use, it'll take a minute to go through this process. The output of this process is going to be an XML file that has the information about how your COBOL programs know the data to look like in VSAM and how you want the data to be stored inside of SQL Server. And while there's a lot of information here, I really don't have to fill very much in at all. It is automatically done for me. In essence, what I've done is point to a COBOL copybook. And in this case, this COBOL copybook had some key information. So I defined these 3 elements as key element items. I also have this blob of data sitting down here with a whole bunch of different data elements in it, different data types, comp fields, occurs fields. None of that matters. It's all transparent to NeoData. And in this case, these 2 items right here, these 05 levels, are redefinitions of this level. So this FJI record and FJP record are redefinitions of this FJR record. And the reason that's important to me is that in this case, since I have different record types in this data file, I could write it all out to one single SQL table, but that's not very efficient. So NeoData gives me the ability to go through and normalize that data. In this case, all I had to do was to tell it that this very first record type, that I wanted it written out to an area that was based on a condition code. So if this field right here, this FJ record code, which is this item right here, if it has an R in it, I know I've got this record type. If it has an I in it, I've got this record type. And if it has a P in it, I've got this record type. And the only other thing that I've had to do is to tell it where I want that written. So I'm either going to write it to a table called FJR table, or FJI table, or FJP table. The only other thing I've got to do is define my endpoint. In other words, tell it where I want this information written inside of SQL Server. So I'm going to write it in this case to my own local instance of SQL Server to a demo database. Once I've done that, I pull the information off the mainframe, take the VSAM file, use the utility to convert it to a sequential file, and I can convert that data. So I can convert the data that I pulled from the mainframe, whether it was in EBCDIC or if I've converted it to ASCII, and I'm going to write it to SQL. When I do that, I just, in this case, updated 1,000 records. And if I were to go over to SQL Server, I can see that those 3 tables are out there, unique. So this FJI table only has records in it that have a record code of I. The FJP table only has those that has a P. So since these are in different tables, in other words, they're normalized, this is a much more efficient way to store that data. And the beauty of all this, as I said, is that any COBOL program that would have accessed that VSAM data to start with now is just going to automatically write the data to SQL Server with no changes. All I'm going to do is point the program instead of to the original VSAM file. I'm going to point it to that XML file that I created. And that's a very powerful tool that many of our customers have really come to love and appreciate because it solves a problem that they've had for years, being able to get access to that data for their customers in an easier way. So what are the benefits then? In terms of NeoData benefits, I think there are obviously some ones that just make perfect sense. As I mentioned, NeoData helps you to eliminate the risk of moving to a relational model while still reaping the benefits of such a move. You have different models from which you can choose in deciding how to best store that vSAM data inside of SQL Server on a file-by-file basis. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all model that's perfect, so this flexibility is really important. NeoData even allows you to normalize your vSAM data, splitting multiple record types that might make up your vSAM files into separate tables, as I showed you. This makes for a much more efficient and, we think, flexible deployment model. NeoData offers a very powerful editor that lets you go in and do search criteria based on different factors that you filter on. And NeoData works with both NeoKix and NeoBatch so that all of your COBOL programs can run as they always did, yet still get the benefit of your vSAM data being moved to SQL Server, where the data is more easily accessed and controlled. So, Raul, I'm going to come back to you again, if you don't mind. I'd be really interested in your thoughts about moving vSAM data to SQL Server, and also your experience in knowing how to structure it to get the performance you need versus the flexibility that you desire.
Yeah, right. Well, you do want to plan this portion out carefully. And so always the goal is to come up with a good balance between data accessibility, right, which is what you would get in a fully normalized database, versus performance. And then the way you really look at that is you have to take this at a kind of a table by table approach. There are certain tables that in your existing system are going to be heavily used. They may be large. They may have a lot of cursor processing. For those types of tables, generally, unfortunately, because NeoData offers multiple options on converting and storing your code, the best option for some of those tables may, for example, be using a SQL CLR solution, which allows the data to be stored in SQL Server in a binary format, which is very fast and very efficient for COBOL. But at the same time, with SQL CLR, for example, you could use user data tags to actually draw that data out in either views or to update individual columns directly. So again, you want to really plan that out well, be able to squeeze as much performance out of that as possible.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I agree. Every customer we've talked to says that planning and understanding ahead of time is really important here. The good thing is once you make a decision, you're not tied to it. You can go back and change the way that you've chosen to store that data in SQL without having to rewrite the entire world. So at this point, Mary, I know we had asked at the beginning if people had questions, and I'd like to spend about 5 minutes. We've got one more wrap-up slide after the questions, but I'd like to spend about 5 minutes or so, if we could, and just seeing what may have come across to see if Raul and I could answer them.
Perfect. Yes, we do have a few questions. How do you translate mainframe, MIPS, and memory, etc., to distributed systems resources? Sorry about that.
No, quite all right. So it's a great question, and it's one that we're often asked. One of the challenges is knowing how big you need to be. Everyone's run on the mainframe for years, and they know every bit of the ins and outs of it. With the technology that exists today, for us, we equate to about 100 MIPS as a single core in the Wintel world. So it's almost linear in nature, depending upon the types of processing that you're doing. But as a rough guideline, that has proven to be very successful for people and given them the performance to at least match, if not better, what they were seeing on the mainframe.
Great.
Do you have any other?
Yes, we do. I guess this is a follow-up to that one. After mainframe migration, what happens to the mainframe support staff and programmer?
Great question. Well, Raul, I want to ask your input on this too. I'll share mine as we go along. What we have seen is that COBOL to COBOL, even those 70 and 80-year-old people that I've talked about that I go out and train, and sometimes they're 30s and 40s, they adapt very easily to the new environment. Database administrators, you know, if you're going from DB2, if you're using that on the mainframe, to either Oracle or SQL Server or DB2 LUW off the mainframe. So having the applicable skill set there for maintaining those other types of databases is important. You really need to ensure that the fervor with which you maintain the mainframe, the security, the systems programming capabilities, is duplicated with people who understand the non-mainframe environments like IIS and Active Directory. So sometimes people transition over to those new roles. Sometimes we find customers who have to go find different skill sets to be able to have those folks continue on that level of performance and security and reliability. Raul, could I ask you to comment on that one as well?
Yeah, sure. So from a development staff point of view, as you mentioned, the learning curve is actually pretty small to get up and running in the newer environment. They're familiar already with the COBOL language, so really it becomes more of an issue of learning how to compile and how to work within Visual Studio to debug, and oftentimes the developers are also pleasantly surprised at all of the available tools that they have to be able to help debug their applications with. From an operations standpoint, you know, at Simon & Schuster, for example, we had a set of operators that would normally monitor batch jobs and the batch schedule, and if there were a problem, they would notify us.
Raul, I'm afraid you may have cut out. Mary, I'm afraid we may have lost Raul for a second. Can we go ahead with the next question? We'll take maybe one more question before we finish up.
Perfect. It says, I understand how to transfer VSAM, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, data. How would we move to CA Datacom DB or DB2 tables to SQL Server?
Okay, great question. So NeoData, as the attendee mentioned, is something that handles VSAM to SQL Server. For the other components, Datacom, we work with partners. Most of our latter converters to the Neo products have worked with systems integrators who have tools who will help people do that. Something like DB2 to SQL Server is a fairly straightforward process, and Microsoft offers tooling to assist with that. If you're going from Datacom to SQL Server or Datacom to Oracle, that is a little more difficult to do, and we have to work with some of our specialized partners to do that. If you're going from DB2 to SQL or DB2 to Oracle, that's a fairly straightforward process. There are some changes that are required, but there is tooling that exists for that. If you're going from something that is not as much in our sweet space, like Datacom, we would work with partners to be able to help with that. Okay. And Mary, if you're okay, what I think we'll do is any other questions that we have, since we're running a little short on time, and I want to respect people's schedule since they were nice enough to come listen to us today, is we will publish a response to all the questions to all the attendees so that they will have them.
That's perfect.
Okay, super.
I am back, by the way, Walter. So sorry about that.
Okay. No, quite all right. Trust me, I get it. So just kind of in closing, I want to thank you all for taking the time to learn a little bit about our Neo suite of products. I hope this information has given you, something that's helpful as you look to evaluate your mainframe options. And Raul, thank you very much for sharing your real-world experiences with the audience today. It was, as always, an honor and a pleasure to work with you. Raul, I'd also like to ask, do you have any final words of wisdom you would like to share with the audience about your experience? Any pitfalls or benefits or just things in general that help them prepare as they consider this as an alternative, since you've been through this multiple times?
Yeah, I would say, you're going to want to carefully vet out what all your options are, how much longer you expect to maintain any of these systems that you're considering, rehosting, and so forth. A lot of different options have different, pluses and minuses, pros and cons to them, my experience has been GT Software has been a great partner in helping us vet a lot of that out and helping us kind of plan our migration out as well.
Super. Well, thank you very much for that. I know we're tickled to death that it's been successful in two different companies in the same family. That's kind of exciting to see, and I think you're the prime example of that. There are no two companies exactly the same, as you mentioned a couple of times. Two companies in the same family, but they had different sets of problems at different times and different ways to approach things. And being able to evaluate and plan and work with a trusted partner is, I think, very important. So again, everyone, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I hope this was informative. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at www.gtsoftware.com. We're delighted to help in any way. And Mary, thank you again so much for hosting this today. We really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I'd just like to remind all the attendees to check out our website, cmg.org, as well as we have an event coming up, our annual Impact Conference, which will be held in February 2019 in Seattle, Washington. We hope to all see you there. You can check that out on cmg.org under the events section, and it'll lead you straight to the Impact page. Again, we have a few more webinars coming up along with this one, which we will put up on our website, and we will then submit any questions over to Walter, and he'll follow up with a blog, and you will be able to see that also on our blog page on cmg.org. Thank you all for participating today, and we look forward to seeing you at some events in the future. Goodbye.